Welcome to Oregon Friendly Driver Train the Trainer. It is April 8th, 2026. I am Whitney Bennett, the Education Program Manager at Commute Options. And I am going to be going through the presentation as if this is the real deal presentation, and I'm going to hit every single slide. So I'm working off the presentation that is been currently updated, and there may be more updates in the future, but this is what we got in April 2026. I will pause on slides and give some sample questions that do come up so that the learner is prepared for what might happen when this is presented in real life. So we'll go ahead and get started. Always when I start, I put this screen up, and this is really going to show the pretest. Ideally, in some, or depending on the audience, you can send this pretest QR code out ahead of time, and it can already be taken care of, and you can launch right into the material. For the sake of this presentation, it is here, so I would give the audience 5 is ideal, but sometimes it takes 10 plus minutes for people to complete the pretest. I tell everybody, hi, nice to meet you. I'm going to greet you with a test. Isn't that what everybody loves? But before I even get into my introductions. Then once everyone's wrapped up, we really begin. So welcome to Oregon Friendly Driver. This is a training course funded by Oregon Department of Transportation. I am Whitney Bennett. I'm Education Program Manager from Commute Options. We are the statewide administrators of the program, and we work alongside the Street Trust, Salem Bike Vision, and Safe Lane Transportation Coalition to distribute this course really across the state. A little bit about Commute Options. We offer many programs. We are located in Central Oregon, but a lot of our programs expand outside of Central Oregon across the state. We do, in addition to Oregon Friendly Driver, which you're going to learn all about, we offer Get Their Rewards, which offers incentives to employees to participate in transportation options. We have Safe Routes to School, which educates young people who walk and bike on how to safely navigate the roads and encourages them to walk and bike to school. We have a van pool program, and in addition to that, we have an e-bike safety course. The idea really with what we do is we hit it from all sides, trying to make sure that people have access to transportation options and also know how to navigate the transportation options in a safe way. So what we're going to talk about today is Oregon Friendly Driver and really what it's like to be driving around vulnerable roadway users. We'll talk about what that is. We will cover why crashes happen, what is and is not friendly, infrastructure, and common crashes and how to avoid them. A big part of Oregon Friendly Driver is really the language that we use, the terms that we use, and how we refer to what we're talking about. And a big thing is you're going to hear me say that really we are all people. So we are people walking, we are people biking, and we are people driving. We steer clear, no pun intended or pun intended, of using the word pedestrian because it really takes out that people aspect, a people first type of approach to this conversation. Same thing with using cyclists. We really refer to it with as people biking. And then driving. Really, it's not just the car, it's not a driver, it's a person. So these people are somebody's mother, brother, sister, uncle, and grandparents. So they're not just objects. And the more we can bring everyone down to that level and understand that we're all people trying to get to the places we need to get to, the conversation gets a little bit easier. When I'm presenting this to driver ed students, I ask them, when you get your license, are you going to transform into your car? And, there's also always really great responses to that. But ultimately, no, you're going to be that same person, someone's daughter, son, that is now driving. You're not the car. And so the same thing goes with people walking and people biking. Another piece of the words that we want to make sure we use is the word crash. We don't use the word accident. With education and knowledge and a license comes the understanding that when you make the wrong choice, there are severe consequences. So once you're empowered with that knowledge, there's no more accidents, and they are all crashes. And and it's important to really own up to that and frame it like that when presenting these different types of scenarios. The other thing when looking at this slide is this is split into 3 sections: people driving, people walking, and people riding. You can see there's a list. The list is longer of really, this is just kind of a short summary of why crashes do happen and who's at fault. And the reality, the numbers continually come in, the fault often lies equally among the different users. So whether you're a person walking, riding, and driving. Why this is an interesting perspective is if you think about when there is a crash between a person driving and a person walking, no matter what the bullet is, what the fault is, who's worse off? Audience will often say the person walking, right? The person walking if there's a crash, they will be the ones that will be killed or will be severely injured, and the rest of their life may be changed from that moment forward. So there's a certain level of responsibility that we have as people driving to protect some of these other user groups, and also we have access to information because there's a process of getting your license and a certain level of knowledge required to be able to operate a vehicle. So there is some opportunity there to prevent a ton of these crashes, knowing some of these patterns that are happening on our roads. And those people who walk and bike, what they are called are vulnerable roadway users. So anybody not in a car, or a vehicle. That is a person walking, biking, roller skating, scooters, tractors, horses, and e-micromobility as well. We'll talk about that in more depth later on in the presentation. Utility workers and all the different types of people you might see out on the roads. That crossing guards is another one that will be outside of the vehicle. So when you're in a vehicle, you're containerized, and there is not only a sense of safety, but there is real safety of being inside that vehicle. When you're not, it's a different feeling. At this point, often I will ask the audience, how many people here do walk? How many people do bike to the places they want to go? And if I got no hands up, I will say, how many people have parked their car, gotten out, and crossed the street? Normally people have done that at least once in their life. And then that conversation is like, what does that feel like once you're out and you're crossing the street? It's a sense of vulnerability. So there are laws in place to protect you once you're out of your vehicle and you're on the roadway. And really that's what is propelling this course, is to really start to help protect the vulnerable roadway user. And it's not always just about what the law says. Sometimes it's going above and beyond just to make sure that everybody makes it home at the end of the day, because no one wins when there's a crash. It doesn't matter who's at fault. And you'll hear that come up multiple times throughout the presentation. The presentation itself contains a lot of content about people on bikes and that kind of interface between people driving and people on bikes, because people on bikes are more often in the road. So their infrastructure is often shared right next to people driving. And also what the law says is people on bikes, when they're in the road, are to be treated the same as vehicles and are to follow the same vehicular laws, with several exceptions. Obviously, what we're looking at here is a person on a bike in a bike lane. And so there are those exceptions to when they're in a bike lane, when they're in a crosswalk, when they're on a sidewalk. But in general, if you treat a person on a bike as another vehicle, they're going to fare best. And they have the same rights and responsibilities as other cars, trucks, and other vehicles on the road. With people biking, and this slide also is that prompt to remind everyone that not everybody drives. There's a third of our population that is categorized in the non-driving category. They either are too young to drive, they either are too old to drive, they either may lack certain abilities that will qualify them to drive. They may be choosing not to drive. They may be car light or car free, but often people don't have that kind of option. Driving is a privilege. So it also might be that it's too expensive, and that a trike is going to be a much more accessible means of transportation than actually independently owning a vehicle. So thinking about that, it's not always a choice. And that the people that are out there, the vulnerable roadway users, often are our underrepresented populations that get disproportionately impacted when there are these crashes on the roads between people driving and people using different types of modes like bike or walking. Now, to really get everyone on board with what we're talking about when we say friendly driver, we look at this graphic here. And what you're looking at is you see there is a white car taking a turn. And we have a person on a bike that is riding in the bike lane. But if you acknowledge the paint in the bike lane, you can see the person riding is wrong way riding. Incredibly common. This is the most common infraction that people on bikes do, and we see this often. I'm sure many of you have seen this happen, and maybe many of you have done this. I'm sure it was not on purpose, but maybe have you had gotten to a situation where you've been wrong way riding. Car keeps going, and there's a crash. The question is to the group, is the person driving acting as an Oregon-friendly driver or not? Often we get a mix of hands raised. You may be having your own thoughts right now. And the answer to that question is no. If they don't check and they don't scan and they make the turn and they hit the person on the bike may be legally at fault, so will carry the financial burden of this crash. But the person driving will be carrying that crash for the rest of their life. An Oregon-friendly driver is looking out for ways they can avoid any type of crash with a vulnerable roadway user, so they don't have to ever carry this with them. There are tons of reasons why this type of behavior happens with people on bikes. And really, when people are learning in driver education, they're learning really to scan every direction in the bike lane, the sidewalks, and in all the vehicle lanes as well to see really what's happening before entering an intersection. So this crash can be avoided. Because we know it's so common, this happens with people on bikes in the bike lane, this happens with people on bikes on the sidewalk. And why does this happen? I like to highlight 3 causes or reasons for it. One of them is if you imagine when you were young and you were learning to walk next to traffic, some adult in your life might have given you some wise words and saying, make sure that you're facing traffic, right? When you're walking, you're facing the traffic so you can see the cars coming. So you're on the side, you're facing traffic. You think, well, what's going to be the safest way for me to ride? You got on your first bike, you're just jumping on, you're excited, you're going to be able to get to and from work now. You get on your bike and you think, Grandma used to tell me I should probably ride into traffic or I should be facing traffic, so I'm going to do that on my bike. So you just you apply that learned behavior, that knowledge, that wisdom to a different mode, not knowing that you're putting yourself in a very deadly situation. This is a common pattern. All our roads don't look like what's in this graphic here, where they have nice clean paint, where there's an arrow pointing, and a person on a bike may think that they're doing the best thing, but the reality is it's not. That's one reason. The second reason is by design. Again, not all our roads look like what this graphic looks like, and that person on the bike may need to make a turn and can't get across the street, then make the turn. So it might be the only way to get to the place they need to get to because there's no way that they can actually cross the street. That happens a lot as well, and they may end up there, they may end up on the sidewalk. The other reason, just a bad choice. Right? We see this all the time. We see people driving make bad choices. We see people on bikes make bad choices. It's a bad choice. It's a dangerous, it's a deadly choice. None of those reasons necessitate that white car running into the person on the bike. It can be absolutely avoided altogether, and then no one has to deal with it. And then we can continue to move on through our day and get to the places we need to go to. There is lots of bike education needed out there in the world, and that will come up as you give this presentation, the them versus us. But the reality is if you just take a step back and have everyone in the room take a step back and remind everybody, it's not about who's right or wrong. It's just about what we can do to make sure that everyone makes it home at the end of the day. There's a lot of power in being able to drive a car, and so understanding that can help ensure that everyone's experience is a heck of a lot safer out on the roads. People riding bikes are required by law to have appropriate illumination. So a front white light and then a back red reflector, although a red light is recommended, but a reflector is what legally they're required to do. And they're required to have those when anytime visibility is poor. So just after sunset, just before sunrise, when it's foggy, when it's snowing, when it's raining, always it's important for people on bikes to have that illumination. Clothing that's bright and reflective is also really great. And as we have all probably seen, it's not always the case. We know that when visibility is poor, we're not always going to see everybody with their bikes and their bike lights on. It happens. Bike batteries of the light will die. I personally switch my favorite light between my two bikes, and sometimes when winter hits and I don't realize how early it's going to get dark, my light's on my other bike. And I've said that enough in this presentation that I start to remember to put my light on my other bike, but the reality is that it does happen. And as Oregon-friendly drivers, what's really important for us to do is to be prepared when visibility is poor. You're checking your sidewalks, you're checking your bike lanes, and you're looking out for other roadway users, not just vehicles. From here, we're going to play this video.
You know how your side view mirror says objects are closer than they appear? Well, when you're on a bicycle, passing vehicles can feel even closer. So when you're passing someone on a bike, keep in mind the size of your vehicle. Remember to slow down and leave extra space. We call it fall distance. It's the room riders need in case they should fall. Also, people on bicycles can take the whole lane if they need to, so you'll need to hold back patiently until it's safe to pass. Because here in Oregon, we all want to get there safely.
So you can leave it at that and move on to the next slide, or you can highlight some of those key points. What's really important when passing a person on a bicycle is make sure there's no oncoming traffic. Highlight that you need to slow to 5 miles below the speed limit. And then give the rider what's called fall distance. The graphic on the side there is illustrating that. I am 5 feet tall. I will ask the audience, do some quick math. Put me on my bike, how much space? Not that much, but that's the fall distance. My husband, he's 6'2". Put him on a bike, different math. So you're going to have to be able to plan that out when you are doing a passing to make sure you give enough fall distance. The bigger the vehicle, the more distance it is good to give, but the more that you should slow down. So what happens, large vehicles, big RVs, trucks, I would say like a semi truck, they create wind blasts and can wipe a person on a bike right off their bike. They can end up underneath your vehicle. So really important to slow down and give proper space. So the one thing too to note here as the questions come up, and the next few slides will help to talk about this more, is that this fall distance specifically is required when speeds are greater than 35 miles an hour. So we're talking about on roads that speeds are set to 40 miles per hour and higher. Where the speeds are slower, that fall distance isn't required. Some areas may have like in-town passing distances, and ultimately what we say to kind of cover this statewide is give as much space as you possibly can if you're in an area that the speeds are slower, but provide a buffer if possible. And then the other tip of this one to know how to know when you can move back into your main lane is you're going to look in your rear view mirror or your rear view mirror, and you'll see the person riding the bike in your rear view mirror. And then that'll be enough space and you can go back into your lane. And then we'll kind of continue this conversation over the next two slides. So as we move forward, is this person passing friendly or not? And then the room will often engage, or you can use a Mentimeter to find out what people's responses are. And then I let everyone know, yes, it is friendly. And some people will say, what? It's a no passing zone. There's a double yellow line. And then I will go to the next slide.
When you're driving in Oregon, it's now legal to pass people on bicycles in a no passing zone, as long as they're riding at less than half the speed limit. First, be patient and hold back for a good moment to pass. Once it's clear, move fully into the next lane and pass at 5 miles below the speed limit. This avoids crowding riders, keeping them safe from the force of passing vehicles. Lastly, wait until you see the riders in your rearview mirror before you move back over. Share the road so we can all get there safely.
So then highlighting, this is a update to an existing law to really accommodate people on bikes. So you can pass in a no passing zone, so where those double yellow lines are, as long as it's safe to do so. So really highlighting that component, that this example that we see in the video is a long road where they can safely see what's coming and they can move into that opposite lane to go around the people on bikes. A lot of our roads in Oregon where there are no passing zones, these double yellow lines don't look like that, and they're windy, and you can't actually see what's coming from the opposite direction, and you're not going to be able to pass. You have to wait, slow down until it's safe to do so. So being clear on that is really important here, because especially when you're talking to a room of new drivers that may just be kind of learning some of the basics, be very clear that this has to be an example where there's plenty of space where you can see if there's any oncoming traffic. Riding on the sidewalk. So it's legal in most places to ride a bike, and this is specifically an acoustic bike, a bike that does not have an electric motor or any motor. It's just a pedal bike, and you can ride these on the sidewalk. There are some areas in downtowns, often in business districts, where it is prohibited, and it's important to check for signage to see where that might exist if you find yourself on the sidewalk. What we recommend in general in Safe Routes to School is we're teaching tips on how to safely ride in the road. It's a much more predictable place for a person on a bike to be riding, but often a lot of students grow up being told, stay on the sidewalk, stay on the sidewalk. And you can see in this example, we've got a truck that's parked in a driveway and trash cans. These are creating obstacles that might impact the view of the person driving and make these kids not actually, or these students not actually visible for when that truck might be backing out. So it puts them in an unsafe position. Always recommend starting to learn those road safety skills so that they can take their bikes on the road. But in the meantime, we'll see lots of students on the roads. There's lots of times too, the infrastructure doesn't allow for a safe place for a person on a bike to navigate on the road, and so they end up on the sidewalk. As an Oregon-friendly driver, what's really important is know that when they're on the sidewalk, they're slightly unpredictable. They could leave the sidewalk at any time. On the sidewalk, a person on a bike is considered a person walking and is protected by those laws. And this is legal. They can be riding on the sidewalk. They are considered people walking. When they're off, then they're people on bikes, and that's when they kind of roll into being the vehicle laws apply to them. It's important just to keep an eye on them, know that they can leave that curb at any time, and that they may be crossing over intersections without knowing all the rules of the road. The younger the rider, obviously, the less experience that they're going to have, and knowing what cars are actually going to do in an intersection. And so really being responsible for what you know and giving space as needed.
People ride bikes for all kinds of reasons. Exercise, fun, and of course, getting from point A to point B efficiently. That's where Oregon's new Stop as Yield law comes in. It allows a person riding a bike to keep some momentum at an intersection while checking for oncoming traffic. Just like it sounds, they're treating that stop as a yield, while all the rules of right-of-way still apply. This rolling stop helps make the ride more efficient and improves the flow of traffic. The law is new, but one thing still remains constant. We all need to look out for each other. It's how Oregonians stand out. People ride bikes.
So the Stop as Yield that video there is to help explain everything. This slide is in this presentation as well, just in case for some reason maybe you can't stream videos. You can always use this slide instead. It's a good reminder to be prepared with possibly a version that has the videos embedded in and accessible by YouTube in case maybe the internet isn't available. You have those videos to show even without having an internet connection. But in the case that it doesn't, there's this slide too. I'd like to highlight with the Stop as Yield that it's important to delineate the difference between the application of this where there's stop signs present versus when there is red lights or so signalized intersection, this stop as yield doesn't apply. And it helps to improve the flow of traffic. So a lot of times what the pushback when this slide is present or when that video shows is that people think it's actually not safer. There's actually research that has been done in the state of Oregon that has proven that it does increase the safety when appropriately used. So there's plenty of evidence that supports this stop as yield currently. The challenge comes obviously if it's not appropriately used. So if a person is going to treat a stop sign as a yield and there are other users at the intersection, then we have a dangerous situation. So if this law, because people who drive are required to have a license, and so there's a different level of accountability on our part, people that are on bikes don't go through any process to learn the rules of the road, and there's potential for misinterpretation of what this means. And a lot of it's common sense. You would want to stop and make sure that everyone's using the proper intersection rules, but what we do see is we may see people on bikes treating a stop as yield sign when you're actually at that intersection. So it's important for people who drive just to have that on their radar, not assume anything, and give enough time and space in case that person does treat it as a yield when you're also there. So ideally everybody stops when there's other users, but we see other behavior patterns happening and we want to just avoid crashes altogether. Hand signals. So hand signals are something that people on bikes will use to communicate with other users on the road. So other people driving, other people on bikes. Hand signals are really excellent when they can be used, and let's all practice hand signals. So what I will often do, you can choose to do this or not, but I will have everybody in the room stand up. And I will have my back to everybody, but I will be able to still see them. And we will go through the hand signals. And I will have them do it with me, and I will have them repeat it. I will play with how quickly that I do them, and then I will land on stop. It's a good way to get people moving, change things up a little bit, and then everyone can sit back down. And sometimes people get mixed up, and it just adds a nice little, like I said, little energetic break for everybody. And then I let everybody know these are really great, but often not used. And there's lots of reasons why hand signals would not be used. So we teach a lot in our bike safety, and on a heavier bike, we say that the safest way to stop is with both hands on the brakes, pressing firmly. So if you have both hands on the brakes and you don't time everything accurately, it's a little harder to get your hand signal out there. So thinking about some of the heavier bikes, like an e-bike that could be out there, it might be someone that's riding that may be spending more time focusing on making sure they're effectively braking than getting their hand signal out. So that can impact whether or not they use a hand signal. Other reasons, some people don't want to take one hand off the handlebars. Definitely with our younger riders, we're always working with them to kind of encourage it, but we'll have half the riders just not feeling confident enough to take one hand off to use that hand signal. Also, if you've got conditions such as rain or a uphill or downhill where it doesn't feel safe to take one hand off, you want to be able to look for other indicators as a person driving if that person is going to, on the bike, is going to be maybe moving from their position that they're in. And what those are is eye contact. So a person on a bike maybe try to make eye contact. This is where an opportunity to talk about window tinting. If the windows are tinted, then it's going to be really hard for that person on the bike to make contact. So maybe think about your window tinting choices, because it makes it unsafe for vulnerable roadway users to effectively communicate when eye contact is really the best means that they have. Another thing for a person driving to look for is the hand on the hip, doing a shoulder check. So a person on a bike will do that to see if it's safe for them to change lane position. Why would a person on a bike change lane position? So it's called taking the lane, often when a person on a bike is going to leave the bike lane and move into the main lane of traffic. There's lots of reasons why this would happen. They could be that they're taking a left-hand turn. Could be that they're entering the roundabout and going to use it as a person driving. There could be an obstacle in the bike lane that they need to avoid. Often there's debris, there could be waste containers, there can be really large drains that the person on the bike may want to avoid, and so they want to get out of that bike lane, and they want to be more seen, and they want to be away from those obstacles. All right, so being doored. I really like to ask the room, the audience, has anybody out there ever had this happen to them? And out of the 6 years I've been teaching, I've only had one class where I haven't had somebody in the room that's been doored. So it is a common thing. People get severely injured from being doored. They can die from being doored. This can happen to a person on a bike. This can happen to a person in a mobility device, which is even can be more dangerous, especially if that mobility device is set lower. It can happen to a person that's out jogging. So it's really important to think about that when exiting your car. And the video that follows helps to explain how to do that. And then we talk about electric micromobility. So moving forward cautiously with this one and really highlighting that people that ride electric micromobility are vulnerable roadway users. They are not containerized in a car. And so when there is a crash between someone on an e-bike or an e-scooter or any of the other types of e-devices that we see out there, the person on that device is going to be way worse off than the person driving. And we have lots of different experience levels of riders out there on the roads, and we're being hit really quickly with a lot of different options. And those that are creating the devices and making all of these different types of modes and marketing them, and the retailers that are selling them have a lot of power, and so they're kind of hitting the streets, and it's getting very exciting for a lot of people. It's also providing a lot of access to people that maybe didn't have the ability to ride or didn't have a car, and it's allowing them to get farther distances. So there's a huge amount of opportunity, but we're in kind of a space where the infrastructure isn't really developing fast enough as the popularity and the purchasing is happening, nor is the laws that are being adopted. So from the Oregon Friendly Driver lens, what's really important to highlight is that we no longer can assume the speeds of, say, a bike, because it could be an e-bike. And some of those e-bikes, whether or not they're legal or not, they are out on the roads. They can go anywhere from 15 to 20 miles per hour to 38 to 45 miles per hour. And so as an Oregon-friendly driver, it's important to not assume the speeds when you do see e-scooters, e-bikes, even skateboards that are out on the road. And that's a great way to avoid a crash. And it's also important not to assume that everyone knows the rules of the road, and to be cautious, and then that will help you prevent any kind of crashes. Always be checking the sidewalks and the crosswalks for any of these devices that might be coming in, and not knowing that it's their responsibility to be stopping. This will go a lot of different directions. It always does. Bringing people back to being like, no one wins when there's a crash. It doesn't matter who's at fault. Yes, if someone's riding an illegal e-moto, you will not carry the financial burden of that crash. But if that person suffers severe injuries, possibly death, that burden you will carry. And so it's an opportunity for us to avoid these kind of crashes and really work with what we have to make sure everyone makes it home at the end of the day. I do like to take this as an opportunity to talk about micromobility, because a lot of questions do come up, and there are things that we can say and we do know, and there's a lot that we don't know yet. And you can always kind of defer as you're moving through the content, say you'll follow up, or I don't have that it's outside of my scope, especially when things get into the nitty gritty of who's at fault when there's this kind of situation, because that's often something that needs to be punted to a bike lawyer. And even then, there's a million different variables. So stepping back out of any kind of legal blame types of conversations and really just putting into perspective that we're here to talk about how we can best reduce the chances of these crashes happening, reduce the number of people that are dying on our roadways, and really doing anything that we can as a community member to have a positive impact on what's happening out on our roadways. So what we're looking at here is the table that is released from Oregon Department of Transportation that really talks about just micromobility, right? We've got bicycles, we have e-bikes, we have motor-assisted scooters, motorized wheelchairs, and drawing attention up to the e-bikes. Currently, it's April 2026. What we have on the books is a 3-class system for e-bikes. Class 1 is a bike with pedals that can go no faster than 20 miles per hour, pedal assist, no throttle. Class 2 has a throttle, max speed is still 20 miles per hour. Class 3, no throttle, max speed 28 miles per hour. As you see here, if you have something outside of that classification system, outside of this table, it's an unclassified illegal device. There's nothing that will protect you if there is something that happens on the roads. If there is a crash, even if it is not your fault, because you're riding something that's not actually legal classified. So it's an opportunity to, maybe you have an audience that is considering entering into the electric micromobility world and considering purchasing. It gives them purchase power. It informs the consumer. And this it aligns with Oregon Friendly Driver because it helps keep our roads safer. But then making sure you just kind of remind everyone the purpose for bringing this in here is just to highlight we're in this, trying to figure this out. We have new laws that are coming in. We did get a class system, and that's a helpful tool in order to figure out where they can be allowed. But there's more being developed, types of bikes. There's ones that are being called class 4, but that's actually not something that the Oregon law actually acknowledges. So they're all just unclassified, illegal, but they are out there. And being aware that their speeds are variable is going to be a thing that really helps keep you safe. And their behavior and the gaps that they might have in understanding roadway safety is there. And so giving enough space to be able to slow down and avoid a crash is going to be the best approach currently with what we've got. So basically, very basically, the bicycle laws apply to e-bikes as long as they're class 1, 2, or 3. And then therefore bicycles, application of vehicle laws to bicycles, so an e-bike is a vehicle. So they have the same rights and responsibilities. In the educational materials, it's always encouraged if you're on an e-bike, you're going to be riding on the road. E-bikes are not allowed on sidewalks. E-bikes are also, in certain areas, not allowed on shared use paths. So it depends on the region, the area, the jurisdiction, the district, and what kind of rules they've applied to their shared use path. If people are out there riding, it's important that they kind of look into that, find out where they can ride based on the type of bike, the class that they have. It's not, everyone doesn't know that. Ultimately, we just all have to watch out for each other as people start to kind of get on board with how to safely use these new devices and work with the other users on the road. So as I noted, there is a class definition. There is an age requirement. You are required currently to be 16 years old to ride any type of e-bike in Oregon. That will change January 1, 2027, where Class 1 will be opened up to anybody that's 14 or older, but currently everybody's required to be 16. E-bikes are not allowed on the sidewalk, as I mentioned, and helmets are always recommended, but a rider on a bike, anybody that is under 16 is required to wear a helmet. So if a passenger is on an e-bike, they're required to wear a helmet. It's a choice if you're 16 or over, but it's a very wise choice because a traumatic brain injury is definitely something that no one really wants to live with. All right, we're going to dive into infrastructure. So this is that big word for really the built environment, the paint on the road, pedestrian overpasses or multimodal types of developments that are out there, everything we see out there on the road. Let's dive into a little history of traffic engineering. There's a ton in this slide, and you can kind of pick and choose how you really want to deliver this message. But it's really showing, how do we get to the place we are now? Why is Oregon Friendly Driver needed anyways? Why do we need to go out and tell everyone to be careful around vulnerable roadway users? This slide tells that story. Back in the 1800s, main modes of transportation were people on horses and people walking. Direct line of access, point A to point B, served those users, people on horses, people walking. Wasn't amazing. Might have been a dirt path. It wasn't like a 6-lane highway, but it still was the best. It was designed for that type of user. 1900s, we start to introduce the bicycle. So still, it's serving those people on horses, people walking, people on bikes directly, point A to point B. Transit is coming in. It's not a main source yet. It's just coming in, and they're trying to navigate. Let's put some lines here and there, but it's not. We're not designing our transportation network for the trolley yet, or those bigger cars. 1920s, the car comes in. No one thinks it's going to stick. This thing's going to explode. No way that we're going to really design anything, our roads, to serve this big dangerous vehicle or this big new thing that's coming in. And then guess what happened? 1950s, as we move on, we designed everything for it. We made all of our road networks serve the moving of cars. And so looking at the last two squares, you can see, second to last, we were moving people. And then we move in to now we're moving cars. And the design of our transportation network is really about that. How can we move cars? How can we kind of use the transportation network to grow and to prosper? And a lot of that came from building large, wide roads to help move traffic quickly. And what that does to our other users is point A to point B has point A1, point 2, point A2, point A3, and you're kind of crossing over. You don't have a direct route to get to where you need to go because you're kind of leapfrogging over a network that was designed for people driving. Puts people in dangerous situations, makes the trip a lot longer, and you're not prioritized as a user as much as a person driving is. And these often, it's like a single occupancy vehicle driver or one bicycle. And there's a difference in the impact overall. So we get into this situation where people are crossing a major highway to get to the other side because that's where their apartment is, and there's not a really easier place. And then people driving are like, why is that happening? Why are they there? And it's sometimes because they don't have another option, because we've created this. There is a ton of work being done in a lot of municipalities that are improving this situation, but it's kind of a Band-Aid going on to this auto-centric development that was this driving force for a very long time for us. So this slide helps people to be a little bit more compassionate when they see people that are navigating the roads outside of a vehicle, a vulnerable roadway user, in some place that maybe they're like, why the heck is that person there? So thinking about it, like, they don't always have a choice. They got to get to the bus stop on the other side of the road. Infrastructure can be nice. Like up in the top right corner of this slide, you see there's a nice crosswalk. There's probably a rapid flashing beacon in there somewhere, and there's some signage to let people driving know that there's people crossing. But lots of times, infrastructure looks more like what we see on the left-hand side, or lack of infrastructure, where we've got really wide roads, no direction really for people that are not in cars or even people driving about where they're supposed to be and how to get to where they need to go. And then, even we have a 20 mile per hour school zone sign, and the chances of people going 20 miles an hour on that wide of a road, it's not that likely. Creates a very unsafe situation without enough and without adequate infrastructure. The slide on the bottom right is what happens to our bike lanes. Lots of times during the season, it can get wiped out by rain. There can be a buildup of cinder, of ice, and the bike lane can be inaccessible. And so people will need to use the main road. And I've seen people on bikes having to leave the bike lane. I've seen plenty of mobility devices in the main road because the sidewalk is not adequate, the bike lane's not adequate, and their only option is to be in that main road. So infrastructure can be great for vulnerable roadway users, but it can also put them in really hazardous situations. That's another example of a crosswalk that exists, but once you go through that crosswalk, there's really no direction of where that person walking can go. There's no sidewalk, there's no wayfinding. It's just kind of dropped into a really wide road, and that also puts people walking in a precarious situation. So infrastructure for people walking.
Oregon-friendly drivers recognize that every corner is a potential crosswalk. As a person driving, always look for various signs indicating a person's intent to cross, even before any part of the person extends into the crosswalk. A person shows intent to cross by extending any part of their body, a wheel, cane, crutch, or bicycle, into the crosswalk. As a person driving, you must stop before the curb cut and remain stopped at any crosswalk, whether marked or unmarked. When possible, establish eye contact. You must wait until persons crossing have cleared your lane and the adjacent lane before proceeding. It is especially important to come to a full stop to leave time and space for those who are elderly, visually impaired, or living with a disability. If the person has low vision or is blind, you must wait until they are completely across the roadway. If you see a vehicle stopped at a crosswalk, passing them is illegal. A stopped vehicle can obstruct your view, which makes it hard to see the person crossing. To prevent a potentially fatal crash, always stop if another vehicle is stopped at a crosswalk. An Oregon-friendly driver understands that we're all people trying to get where we're going safely. To learn more, visit OregonFriendlyDriver.org.
All right, so I like to highlight in that video that low vision person that was crossing. Low vision indicated by her yellow cane. That's my mom. And yes, people that are blind or low vision indicated having a white tip cane or a seeing eye dog. You are required to wait till they make it all the way across. So this has recently been clarified from our legal advisors from Oregon Department of Transportation that even if that person that is low vision makes it to the refuge island, you are still to remain stopped until they make it across the other few lanes. Really important to highlight this. In thinking about it, it's sending a clear message to other people at that intersection that someone is crossing the street. So it's not only the law, but it creates a safer experience for that person who's crossing that has limited visibility or no visibility. And crosswalks, right? They are in Oregon, every corner is a crosswalk. So often there are these lovely marked crosswalks like we see on the right-hand side. And then often they are unmarked. They sometimes can be T intersections still. So coming in and looking at this one, if this road was not here and this sidewalk continued to have a T intersection, you still have 1, 2, 3 crosswalks where people can cross the street. This is another example of that same thing, the different types of crosswalks, including mid-block crosswalks. Rapid flashing beacons. So the piece to say about this, sometimes people even see this photo and go, he's riding his bike in the crosswalk. This is an opportunity to say, yes, people can ride their bikes in crosswalks. The detail with that one is as they're at that curb ramp, which would be this point and this point, they're required to go walking speed, and they are required to they go with the general flow of pedestrian traffic. So we recommend, as a best practice, dismounting the bike and walking the bike across, but it's not required by law that a person on a bike actually get off and walk their bike, so they can be riding in the crosswalk. But rapid flashing beacons Highlighting in this slide that the way these work is when someone wants to cross, they will either they will push that button depending on the mechanism and how it's triggered. Lights flash, vehicles are required to stop, people driving are required to stop, and then the person walking or biking will cross. The challenge with these is sometimes there's a little inconsistency in design. So some of them, there's a button to push. Some of them are timed. Some of them are censored. So if someone's used to a censored one, they may not know they have to actually manually push the button. That said, sometimes people will step into a crosswalk before they trigger the light. So as an Oregon-friendly driver, it's important to see when people are showing that intent to cross, even if those lights aren't flashing, and stop and allow them to cross the street. So a person intent to cross is someone will, as the video says, extend a foot, cane, hand into the crosswalk, and that's their intent to cross. But you all saw my mother and her cane. Are you going to wait for my mother to extend her cane, her white-tipped cane, into the crosswalk in order to register that they're showing intent to cross? And generally the audience says, no, probably not. I think in the state of Oregon, people do a really great job picking up on those signals pretty quickly and do a great job stopping before someone actually has to extend a limb or a wheel into that intersection. So keeping your eyes out and looking for those signals will just make it a safer experience for those that want to cross the street. Great time to highlight, like, why would we care if they feel safe? And a lot of it is thinking about more people that walk and bike means, especially those that are actually choosing it instead of driving, it means there's a few less cars on the road. So if we help make it comfortable for them to cross the street, maybe they'll keep on walking to the places they want to go. Less cars on the street makes a better driving experience for you because maybe there's a little less traffic, or that growth factor of the quantity of traffic, intensity of it, doesn't just keep on climbing up. So if we diversify the different ways that we're getting around, it's going to make a better experience for every single individual that's using the roadway network. As the video highlighted, which this slide doesn't quite capture all of it, but it's a law to stop if another car is stopped at a crosswalk. Your view would be blocked. Especially if it was maybe a big bus or a big truck, you're not going to be able to see if there is a person crossing that crosswalk. So you always want to stop and make sure that you wait for whatever reason it is that other car is stopped, right? And often it's because there's a person in the crosswalk. Looking at this slide, I asked the audience, is the gray truck acting as an Oregon-friendly driver? Most people get this one, say, no, it's not like acting as an Oregon-friendly driver. As you can see, this truck is pulled into the crosswalk. And the person walking, that little dot of a person there, is going to have to, let's walk into the intersection. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but really have to kind of step into, we've probably all been there before where you're going to cross and someone's actually stopped right in that crosswalk and you have to go into the intersection, putting that person walking in a really high risk of being hit by a person driving. So you always have to stop at that safety, at that line, that white line. Now there is such thing as a safety stop. So stopping at that white line before the crosswalk, letting people walking and biking get through the crosswalk. Once it's clear, because people walking have the right of way in that crosswalk. Once it is clear, you can do a safety stop. So you can move forward enough so that you can see if it's safe for you to make that turn. But only once the crosswalk is clear. Now we'll go into the infrastructure for people biking. Bike lanes. So trying to use this time to really clarify who has right of way in a bike lane. When do you cross over a bike lane? When is it my lane? When is it their lane? So a bike lane is for people who bike, whether they're riding an electric bike or an acoustic bike. It is for people who bike. People who bike have right of way in a bike lane. People that drive can cross a bike lane, for you can see the graphic on the right, pulling out of the driveway, taking a turn, pulling into a driveway, but they have to wait until people on bikes have cleared. So because people on bikes have the right of way. The other thing is that that triggers, there's another thing to say during this slide. It really is that what the law says is people on bikes are required to ride in a bike lane if it's present, or ride as far to the right of the shoulder as possible, right into the right side of the road. And as long as it's safe to do so. So there's a series in the law, there's a list that goes down of why that might be the case. And that goes back to my conversation prior about taking the lane. So there are lots of times where that shoulder or that bike lane will not be safe to ride in. There are also times when the person needs to position themselves in the main lane so that they can enter a roundabout, like is shown in this image in the photo on the left, or if they're taking a left-hand turn. So they are required to be in the bike lane, but if it's not safe, they're not required to be in the bike lane. I will say that when I am riding my bike, if I get in the main lane of traffic and someone is getting annoyed that I'm there, I would way rather annoy that person than be invisible. And sometimes that feeling of being invisible in the bike lane can be really very unpleasant feeling. It also, if you feel invisible, you probably are, and it's going to be safer for you to position yourself in the main lane of traffic. So highlighting that point, because often I think as a person driving, you don't really know, you're wondering why that person isn't just in the bike lane. Looking at this bike lane in the photo on the left, beautiful, right? Nice and wide. If anybody's ever been in this particular bike lane near downtown Bend, it has gigantic culverts or drains that if you hit it with your bike, and your bike is rigid, you can really take a beating and sometimes even just get thrown off your bike. So, although this is a really nice looking bike lane, it has some areas that make it not a great place to ride, and then often people will be in the main lane of traffic just to avoid those drains because it can be very unsafe to go over them.
Oregon-friendly drivers understand how to safely cross a bike lane when making a turn. A person driving may only enter into a bicycle lane just before turning at an intersection or crossing over to turn off the road, and always after yielding the right-of-way to people on bicycles. A person driving cannot move into or cross the bike lane until they have the right in the intersection. Oregon-friendly drivers ensure a safer experience for all who use our roads. To learn more, visit us at OregonFriendlyDriver.org.
So highlighting there that right of way. So often in an intersection, people might think that they can use a bike lane as their turning lane, highlighting that no, it's not a turning lane. And if you know anything in the area that you're presenting at that might be a good example where there's maybe a large bike lane that looks like a turning lane, you can highlight and point to that saying it's actually a bike lane. You can cross over it when making your turn as long as you have right of way. Right of way equates to there's not a person in the bike lane. You cannot pull into it, stop, wait for that turn. This example is showing a scenario where there's a bike lane and then the turning lane to the right. So you can cross over the bike lane where the dashed lines are as long as there's not a person on a bike right there. So waiting for them to make their way through, and then you can cross over, and then you can wait in that turning lane that is for people driving. Lots of different types of bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, protected bike lanes. They're kind of taking on lots of different ways of designing them to increase the safety of the vulnerable roadway user. The same thing applies. They're still, for people who bike, you can cross over them if they're free of people on bikes, but you cannot use them as your driving lane. Here is a protected bike lane. This is a great example too to highlight the benefits of using the far hand reach or Dutch reach to exit your car. In this protected bike lane, although there's that little buffer for car doors, often, as you can see, the second car has kind of parked in that buffer, and that door, when it opens, can easily open and take out a person on a bike using that protected bike lane. So it's kind of like not so protected. But a good reason to tell people, even if you're in the passenger seat, using that far hand reach is a really safe way to exit your car. Right, what we're looking at here is there is a truck and it is parked in the bike lane. This is a private vehicle parked in the bike lane. I ask everybody, is this person driving the truck, parking the truck, acting as an Oregon-friendly driver? Everyone normally gets this one. No, they are not. So a person, private vehicle, cannot park in the bike lane if it is if someone like a utility worker, post office, emergency vehicles, that it's like by duty they were required to do this, then they can park in the bike lane. But personal vehicles, the random Amazon delivery vehicles that are out there, they cannot park in the bike lane. It causes a great danger for people on bikes, and just one more reason they have to kind of get out and into the main lane of traffic. So it's important not to use that as your parking area. Sharrows, so shared lane markings. And these are, we say often they're in places where maybe the road is too narrow for people on bikes and people driving to be riding side by side. So what it does is it encourages the people on bikes to be in the main lane of traffic. And they're often, like I said, they're on areas where the streets are narrow. Sometimes it's not just because they're narrow. Sometimes sharrows are used to map out a greenway, a bikeway, a low stress network to help encourage people on bikes on more of a safe route that's going to take them off some of the main arterials and give them a better way to navigate around the community. And it's important as an Oregon-friendly driver just to know if you see these sharrow markings, what that means, as if there is a bike lane next to you, it's going to disappear, and then if there are people on bikes in it, they're going to be moving into your lane or into the main lane. These are often in places, these are always in places where speeds are slow, so that type of arrangement is not going to impede the flow of traffic. I really like to flip the script a little bit on this slide. So looking at this, and the new presentation has that parking removed just for clarity, so you'll see that. But I like to talk about the people on bikes and ask the audience, are the people on bikes acting as Oregon-friendly bikers? General response is always mixed, and a lot of people have examples and are disgruntled with this. And I share with them that yes, the people on the bikes are acting as Oregon-friendly bikers. So people can ride two abreast next to each other as long as it's not impeding the flow of traffic. So because a sharrow is slow speeds, this kind of riding behavior is friendly, is legal. Because the speeds are slow, also the distance is of how close the car behind is not creating a dangerous situation. So, yes. And then highlighting that 2 can ride abreast, not 3, not 4, not 15, it's 2. And 2 can ride abreast in a bike lane as long as it's not impeding the flow of traffic. So it's a great opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think there's often misunderstanding about the legality of that.
Oregon-friendly drivers care about the safety of others at roundabouts. A person on a bike may use a roundabout in 2 different ways, as a vehicle or similar to a person walking. If a person on a bike is in a bike lane as they approach, they will use the vehicle lane while inside the roundabout. The person on a bike must yield to traffic in the roundabout, signal to exit, and yield to any people walking at the crosswalk to safely exit the roundabout. If a person on a bike uses a roundabout, similar to how a person walking would use a roundabout, they will immediately slow to a walking speed. They will stop before the crosswalk and allow just the very front of the bike wheel to extend into the crosswalk, which shows intent to cross. A person on a bike will check to make sure people in cars have stopped to allow them to cross, and people in cars will stop as long as it is safe to do so. Oregon-friendly drivers ensure a safer experience for all who use our roads. To learn more, visit us at OregonFriendlyDriver.org.
Right, roundabouts. So we're seeing an increasing number of roundabouts being constructed. You may be presenting in a community that does not have roundabouts, and depending on the audience, you can choose to skip these slides or take them out or hide them. But often I like to not assume everyone's going to just be driving in their own community, that they may be venturing out and end up in one of our communities in Oregon that are heavily decorated with roundabouts. And so the more knowledge people have, the better. The video before really got into a ton of detail about roundabouts, about safe walking and biking. So if there's any questions that come up, always take some time, leave some time to be able to answer them, because there's a lot in that video. Some key points to highlight is, although roundabouts can be confusing if you're not used to them, the reality is that there are some they're significantly safer. So anywhere between reducing crashes from 75 to 90% in severity, and you're taking an intersection that has 32 contact points, and where there can potentially be a crash with a vulnerable roadway user, and you're dropping that down to 8 different contact points. And so that significantly reduces the chances of a fatality or a severe injury, crash with a vulnerable roadway user. And there's just a learning curve sometimes. When I'm speaking to students in driver education, I tell them how lucky they are, because they're learning to drive with this being the norm. But for many mature drivers, it isn't the norm. And sometimes it's one thing, a one-lane roundabout, but then we get into multiple lane roundabouts and it can get that much more confusing. And they're slightly inconsistent in how they're designed, because we're still in a journey to try to find out what is the best design in certain scenarios. That all said, it's good to take it slow, because vulnerable roadway users, specifically people on bikes, can navigate a roundabout in a few different ways. One of them, they can be navigating it as a person driving. So they'll yield to traffic on the left, and then they will enter the roundabout, ride in the center of the lane, and then they will signal and exit. People on bikes don't always know that it's very important that they ride in the center of the lane. But as a person driving, when you see a person on a bike in a roundabout, you see them as a vehicle. Would you ever pass another person driving in a single lane roundabout? Most people would answer no. And so then I say, you're never going to pass a person on a bike. Those lanes are far too narrow to allow for safe passing. So you can think of it as a sharrow, and are really in there in the middle. The other way a person on a bike can use the roundabout is as a person walking. So they can ride up onto the sidewalk, and they can choose to dismount or continue riding to cross the crosswalk. And you would stop as if they were a person walking in the crosswalk and wait for them to get all the way across. And then I like to always take this as an opportunity to remind everybody, as an Oregon-friendly driver, it's really important to signal as you exit the roundabout. Bike boxes. So we have this slide, and we also have a video that will follow that you can also play. Bike boxes are something as well you can choose to keep in the presentation or take out if it's not present in the community that you're presenting at. But again, we don't want to always assume people are not going to leave their community. So it's good to talk about these because maybe they're not there now, but they're becoming more and more popular. The use of green paint is becoming more and more popular. So green paint is used to indicate to all roadway users that this is where people on bikes are going to be. I tell people on bikes that they don't need to have paint think for them. So for some reason, that paint or that situation, that scenario, there's a lot of factors always going on the road. It's not safe to be in that green paint. They don't have to be in that green paint, but it's a place to build that kind of awareness that like, hey, watch out for bikes. This is likely where they're going to be. People on bikes, when there's a bike box, will go to the front of that intersection. This helps with the flow of traffic. And I'll let the video do the rest of the explaining.
We all know green means go, except when you see a green bike box. Then, green means wait here and watch for bikes. What's a bike box? It's the big green area in front of a traffic light. It's good for everyone. It helps you see people on bikes and gives them a safer place to wait. At a red light, stop behind the bike box, not in it. When the light turns green, wait for all the riders in the box to go first. And always check your rear view and blind spots before turning. Stop behind bike boxes. Another tip for a safer trip from ODOT.
All right, so more on green paint. Cross bikes is really what this is showing is the extension of the bike lane through an intersection. People on bikes have right of way in the bike lane. So in this kind of infrastructure, people on bikes have right of way in what you're seeing here where this green paint is. So the example on the right-hand side, if you imagine there was this white car that was in the lane and wanting to take a right-hand turn, they would be required to wait for the person on the bike to make it all the way through the intersection because that would be crossing the bike lane, so they need to wait till that's cleared. If there are any examples in the community that you're presenting in, bring them in here and talk about that. You can you can drop them in the presentation and really kind of hash out what is the safest way to navigate the specific placement of green paint. Because it's popping up more and more, and depending on the community you're in, there might be some things that are really worth talking about and demystifying. The other thing about cross bikes is, in the photograph you can see, as long as that person on the bike is on the green paint, they're a person on a bike. So the rules apply to them as a person on a bike. They can move into the white paint, and then they're a person walking. And so that's one of those exceptions to people on bikes, how they can kind of be different. They could be considered a vehicle, a person on a bike, or a person walking, depending on what infrastructure they're actually utilizing. Now we're going to go into common crashes, how to avoid them.
Oregon-friendly drivers are aware to avoid a left cross and a wrong-way left cross when making a left turn. A left cross happens when the person driving turns left without adequately searching for people on bikes. In this scenario, the person on a bike is not visible to the person driving the SUV because of the visual barrier of the white vehicle. The person driving the SUV starts their turn, even with the other vehicle in the intersection, and is not given enough time to fully search for people in the bike lanes. This common crash is easily avoided by slowing down to be sure there are no people on bikes or foot that may be out of your line of sight. Wrong-way riding is one of the most common and dangerous mistakes people on bikes make. A wrong-way left cross happens when the person driving turns left without adequately searching for people on bikes. But as a person driving, if you can anticipate these types of behaviors, you can avoid this type of crash. Although the person on the bike might be at fault, it's not about blame. An Oregon-friendly driver always looks for people on bikes coming from all directions so we can all get to where we're going safely. To learn more, visit us at OregonFriendlyDriver.org.
So depending on how much time you have, that could be enough to be talking about left crosses and wrong-way riding, or you could dive into the following slides that illustrate it graphically and talking about just how the person on the bike can be invisible really and not when that white car is making its way through the intersection. So it's important to be not only making sure that the main lane of traffic is clear, but also the bike lanes, if anybody's crossing the street, and scanning completely your environment to avoid these kind of crashes. And then the wrong way left cross, I normally brush over this quickly because I really dive into it in the beginning. But if you skip that first slide, you can talk about it here, talking about the reasons why this might happen and how to avoid it by making sure you're scanning and checking for this, because you know how common it is that people will wrong way ride. So checking for it before taking a turn and having that on your radar, it will help you avoid these kind of crashes. A squeeze by is something that happens when an adequate space is not provided. So in a place where the road is narrow and a truck tries to squeeze by a person on a bike, puts the person on a bike in a very dangerous situation. So depending on the speeds, giving adequate space. If it's over 35 miles per hour, giving that fall distance. If it's under, giving as much space as you possibly can. And if you cannot, just hold back until it's safe to safely pass and provide enough space. The right hook, very common crash. It has happened to me twice. Often you can ask your audience and see if anybody out there has been right hooked. It is quite common. This happens when the person driving is taking a right-hand turn and does not check their blind spots, and the person on the bike is going straight and takes them out. Often, especially in my situation, the contact point can be the back of the vehicle, and then the person driving can just drive off, and the person on the bike can be just left there. So, easy one to avoid. You're checking your blind spots, not assuming that it's just you and other people driving on the roads, that there are also vulnerable roadway users that you need to be checking for before you change your lane placement. Leaving the bike lane. So when people on bikes need to leave the bike lane for the various reasons I indicated prior, as you see here, an obstacle in the bike lane. It's recycling day. They're out in the bike lane. Any kind of a drain or a pile of leaves or many things, debris that can get in the bike lane, or ice and snow and cinder. Person on the bike will have to leave the bike lane. What an Oregon-friendly driver can really do here is and take advantage of the vantage point you have from where you're driving. You can see often farther. Sometimes you can see farther than the person on the bike. If you see a barrier and you know that person on the bike is going to have to leave the bike lane, respond effectively by either slowing down or anticipating that that's going to happen in case that person on the bike has to make a sudden move. Sure, it would be great. Ideally, they see it and that they respond appropriately. But in order to avoid a potential crash, because again, no one wins when there's a crash, it's good if you can anticipate even before them, slow down, give some space, and that's a great way to avoid leaving, when a person on a bike has to leave the bike lane. Impaired driving. We definitely don't spend enough time on this, but it tends to be just talking about it in this way, something you will never do, and it makes you unpredictable, and it causes a huge amount of risk to you and to every single human that's out there on the road. So never do it. No type of intoxicants while you're behind the wheel. You have a lot of power behind the wheel, and taking it for granted, like going and driving impaired, is going to put so many people at risk, and it's never worth it. The same with distracted driving. So that's a pile of leaves right there, and the person is taking the lane, and what we've got is a person distracted driving, texting. So when you're distracted, you're not able to pick up on some of those things that might be happening on the road. Distracted driving can be texting on the phone. It can also be other types of distractions. You could be cognitively distracted, really thinking about something you should have said, you should have done, and not being fully present. So you can also be auditorily distracted. There could be things going on, like listening-wise. You can have someone, even if you're on a hands-free call and you're listening to that conversation, You're also distracted and not fully present in the car, on the road, with everything that's going on. You can be visually distracted by checking out your phone. So these are all things that create incredibly dangerous situations. An easy way to avoid it is put your phone away, pay attention, be present, and you can avoid any potential crashes that happen from maybe a last unexpected maneuver by other users on the road. Speeding. The speeds were set often for quite a good reason. A lot of times they're even much faster than would be safe for that said road. Follow those speed limits. When we speed, it cuts down our reaction time and our response time to when something might change in our environment. And really just slowing things down can greatly increase the chances of you being able to respond to different scenarios that take place. This is a great example of the variation of when you apply more speed, how that can significantly change the outcome of when there is a crash. So at 23 miles per hour, if there is a crash, person driving gets in a crash with a person walking or biking, someone's mother, brother, sister, daughter, grandma, there is a 90% chance survivability. So 10% chance that they're going to die from that crash. Odds are relatively good. 42 miles per hour, just adding a little bit more on top of that. The odds of survival is cut, and you got a 50% chance. So someone's mother, brother, sister, cousin, daughter, grandma has a 50% chance of surviving that crash. At 58 miles per hour, when there is a crash between a person driving and a person walking or biking, there's a 90% chance that that person's going to die. And the chances of them surviving is 10%. So that crash between another person, someone's grandma, someone's son, someone's aunt, they got a 10% chance of making it out alive. When there's a crash between a person driving and a vulnerable roadway user, that crash often results in the person who gets hit life changing dramatically, and they will no longer live the same way as they did from that day forward if they are still alive. So if you take nothing else from this, an Oregon-friendly driver slows down, gives some time so that everybody makes it to the places they need to go. From this point, you will take the final exam. It is the same test, and it's really a chance for us to know whether or not we covered everything effectively. You learned a little bit, and then you get an Oregon-friendly driver certificate. Save that certificate, hold on to it. It could be valuable to show your employer depending on what you need to keep record of, and you can always come back and revisit it as well. And we'll talk about the online course just briefly, but if anybody has any questions, the slide prompts the questions. And then letting everybody know if you really love this content, want to learn more, because there's a lot more you can dive into, or you want to retake it, or you know someone that would greatly benefit from taking Oregon Friendly Driver. This is available online on demand from OregonFriendlyDriver.org. And you can go to the website and you'll see the enrollment button and you can take it online in your own time. We also have the same course available in Spanish. So please share it with the people you know. Get it out there. The more people that are driving safely on the roads, the better it is for everybody in the community. And then here are some resources if you'd like to learn more. And with that, I hope to see you out on the road driving safely, and enjoy learning more about being an Oregon-friendly driver. Again, my name is Whitney Bennett. I am currently the Education Program Manager at Commute Options. It's been a pleasure to share this material with you. There's a lot more resources at www.oregonfriendlydriver.org and lots of videos on our YouTube channel that you can review and check out. Have a great rest of your day.